as soon as people start logging in, more folks join us, I'll go ahead and admit them as well. But wanted to make sure we had enough time for our discussion. And so I wanted to welcome all of you again to week two. Thank you for making the effort of being here live in person. I know that it's a little bit difficult, maybe schedule or even for any other access reasons for you to do this on a regular. So again, even though you signed up for the class, I appreciate you making the effort, right? Long distance. Today, there are a couple things I wanted to show you that I've gone ahead and updated on our class website on GadgetSpace. And then I wanted to discuss the weekly journal for this week. I kind of transition that into a larger discussion with the rest of you, okay? So I'm going to go ahead by begin sharing the screen. Oh, I don't think I have that one up yet. Oh, that's why. Sorry, it's, there we go. Alrighty. So this is our class, and this was week one. Move this as a student. Okay, and up here, those of you joining us for the first time, this is where you're gonna have your teaching assistant's contact info. We're broken up alphabetically. So depending on your last name, make sure that you refer to which TA you should coordinate with regarding any kind of class questions or assignment that you might have. Speaking of assignments, there were a couple of students that emailed me regarding submitting their journal to me because they couldn't upload it through GadgetSpace. I just wanted to address that and say that that was the right thing to do. Reach out to us, reach out to myself, to the TAs, and let us know that you were unable to upload it for whatever reason. You could tell us that it's late and just submit it to us anyways. If the folder on GadgetSpace doesn't allow you, just email it to one of the TAs so that we can get it graded as well. All right. So this is where you'll find that information, as well as office hours and Zoom scheduling purposes. Let's see. Journal number 2, right? We have this general discussion forum again. If any of you have any questions outside of class while we're not in this lecture session, and you want to ask anybody on the teaching team or in class a question, there's this discussion forum that you can do that on. Or it might be that a TA creates a prompt also where some of you can respond to it and participate. So remember, this is a resource. This isn't a requirement. But if some of you would like some direct response from any of us on the teaching team, the discussion forum is a good place to go also. Okay, so journal number 2, we'll go ahead and open up. And so for journal number 2, in the next coming weeks, we'll be introduced to a larger forum of resources that are available to you from UC Santa Barbara. We already had a guest speaker, Angelica Caudillo, from the Office of the Educational Opportunity Program, EOP. She presented with us last Thursday, and her video is available on GadgetSpace. I'll show you in a minute after the prompt where her video is located on our website. All right. So after listening to our guests, as well as participating in the discussion for today, I'd like for you to share what your plans are for taking care of your mind, your body, and your soul. Right? I'd like for you to consider some of the following questions to kind of help you along with this journal. What types of resources were mentioned in class, either by myself or by our guest Angie last week? what kind of resources did we discuss, have we discussed in relation to taking care of mind, body, soul, right? There's mental health, there's Rob Jim. There was a couple of different resources that she talked about during her presentation that you can tap into. I know that there were a few of you that weren't able to attend because of your orientation. That's okay. That's why we recorded the lecture so that you can have it available to reference. So if you're kind of stuck on writing your journal, that video is there for you, so you can go back, watch our guests, listen to what the Department of EOP has to offer, and then try to apply that into your journal response, right? So in addition to this, there's a couple, these are guiding questions, right? I don't want you to feel forced into answering them as a part of your journal, but rather the questions are there intended to help you write the journal. If you have to answer the questions in order to help you along with the journal, great. But if you feel like you can answer those questions without directly addressing each one by itself, you can do that as well, okay? Okay, so the next question, is there anything that you already practice, right? Or would you be willing to try something different? If you already have some tools in your box related to taking care of your mind, body, and soul, right? What are those tools? What are you already practicing? And then in addition to that, have you considered expanding the tools related to this section? Have you considered expansion? If so, what are some of the possibilities? What are some of the options? Right. And so today, hopefully, we can have an active discussion amongst us in order to um, help give a narrative from a personal side, from your personal side, on what are some of the things that we do to take care of our mind, body, and soul. Right. And so the journal is due Friday at noon, and you can begin submitting your journals starting tomorrow at noon. Right. So you have that window of 2 days. If you can't make it, just email us directly again. Any questions before I move forward? Okay. So this is what I wanted to show you on the main page. If you go over to the right side, you'll notice that this is the GauchoCast section. And below here, you'll notice the completed recordings. This is last Tuesday's lecture. And then this is the lecture by our guest visitor from EOP. That's why it has that label there. All righty. Okay. So that's what I had to share as far as some of the updates to the website, and I wanted to go through the journal with you, give you an opportunity to start digesting last week's readings, right, and start applying it into a practical fashion. Um, First in discussion, and then later as I'm asking you through your journal, right? And so as a reminder, these weekly journals are a buildup, right? And they're intended to help you once you get to the master plan assignment. These journals are intended to kind of be a blueprint or a foundation to how you go ahead and answer that master plan assignment, right? And so you have the creative option on the how, what platform you want to present it on, but then also these journals give you the context to help you build and consider what will be these goals that you're setting in the next 1 to 5 years. Okay. Any questions so far? Now that I'm done screen sharing. No. Feel free to.
I
Yes,
actually do have a question.
Jocelyn.
Yes. So I was looking through Gaucho Space and I noticed that there's this area, and I'm not sure if you went over it already, but the discussion forum.
Yes.
And there's like I'm not sure if we have a discussion already due. It was based on the long-term, short-term goal.
So the discussion there was already on for this week.
Yeah, there's already 2 people that already posted, but I wasn't sure if it was already like it was open for us to, because I don't know I didn't see where the questions were for us to answer.
No, this is I haven't read these yet, in all honesty. But these discussions, once I read them right, the intent is to also begin answering what the students post. So if you have something interesting that you wanna share, given the class um, and what we're discussing this week, you can post on the discussion forum and share with the rest of us. And then the intention then is for those of us that hold those same interests to then start participating and communicating, right? So there isn't a direct prompt right now. Rather, it's people just talking and trying to initiate discussion, if you will, through their own posts. So if I were you, as I will later on, just go ahead, check it out, and then respond to them. See where conversation goes.
Okay, thank you so much for the clarification.
No problem. Anyone else have a question? Or before I move forward into the discussion?
May I ask something?
Yes, Rena. Is that you?
Yes, it is me. Professor, where are the discussions that she was talking about? I have not seen. There is only the journal that we need to submit.
Oh, if you actually go into the discussion section that's right above the journal submissions, let me go ahead and share the screen with you to show you, okay?
Okay.
One quick second while I transition back to that screen. Okay. So this is where the journal is going to be submitted, right? Right above it, that's where the discussion forum that she's talking about. This is where 2 students have already uploaded discussion points, and where we can then begin engaging with what they're either stating or asking a question of. Does that make sense?
Yes. Is it part of our class, participation, or it is totally optional? Because I understood it should be optional.
The discussion forum is not a requirement.
It is optional.
But rather it's there, right, for students that want to have additional conversation outside of class.
Okay, thank you.
Class space, it opens it up for you to
Thank you.
engage your classmates. Cool. Anyone else? Let's see. Okay. All right. So this is where we're gonna roll into the beginning of our discussion, right? And so thank you, Martin. That's a great reminder. Chapter 2, right? I forgot to mention from Gaucho Space that chapter 2 is available for reading, right? And it focuses on short-term, long-term goals and plans, and their importance in terms of managing not just your day-to-day type of a schedule, but also helping you see the long-term, the long hustle in your game, right? So everything you're doing right now also helps amount itself to something you're going to do in the future, right? And so chapter 2 engages that conversation a little bit. We'll actually talk about that to some extent with the discussion on the first chapter, which is what I want to give us some space for right now. Since we had our friend Angie last week visit us from EOP, we didn't have the opportunity to talk about that introduction, chapter 1, to begin the class, right? So for today, we're going to go into that, and it can definitely segue into chapter 2. For those of you that have already read it, you can definitely see a correlation and a connection, right? So dealing with the first chapter, mind, body, and soul, right? There are some things that I mentioned in there, right? I gave you some options, some scenarios, and what I try to do is make it personal from my experience, not just as a student, but also from the professional side of things, and how I was able to put some of these things together to kind of start creating my own equation of resources, and resource management, right? And eventually started to see things in the context of a toolbox, right? So it turned from an equation to this toolbox for me. But one of the things that has stuck with me for a long time is this concept of self care and maintenance, right? And I mentioned it in there that one of the oldest um, conversations that I can remember, especially having with my parents, was about this, right? Was about I'm not going to be able to help or take care of somebody else if I'm not taking care of myself. And for many reasons. The first reason is the physical side of things. You can run into exhaustion, right? You can run into your own wall by bringing other people's stresses into yourself and into your life, right? And so that's one of them. But the other side of things is how can you understand what your priorities are and create them into a routine to help long term avoid running into so many stressful slash anxious moments? Because something that occurs to students, especially at research one or highly competitive universities, is that they tend to suffer from anxiety issues, right? And we'll discuss this. We'll ask actually one of our TAs to help contribute to this conversation, given her background in this. But we want to understand that mind, body, and soul, right, connect, and you can take care of one, but if you're not taking care or maintaining the other two, right, you're not keeping in balance, and that balance is what's key, right? So if you're working out every day, right, you're running every day, you're lifting weights, you're doing aerobics, whatever, that's one area of it, right? But there's also the mental health, that emotional component that I bring in with um, the mind and the soul, right? And so therapy is an obvious one, right? But meditation is something that I mentioned, and it's something that can be done in different ways, right? And last class I used the example that when traveling to work with different juveniles um, that are locked up behind juvenile halls, and I recommend meditation, right? Some of them are turned off because they understand the stereotyped version of that, right? That it sounds one way, it looks one way, it's only practiced in a certain fashion. Um, but digging around, I actually found um, Sean Puff Daddy Combs has his own meditation that he has available on Audible for free, right? And it's his own chant. And I listened to it, and I found it, to be something that I could add to my collection, so I can rotate it in and out whenever I feel like a change to the type of meditative practice I want to do, right? And so I told the students about it, and some of them were connected to it, right, because of their connection with hip hop and their love for that, and they could find these relevant real life connections. Some people, despite having those real life connections, were just kind of like, P. Diddy wasn't it for me. But because they were already there, they were still searching, and they were able to find different alternatives, right? Different practices for meditation that were available for free. And this was something that they were able to implement gradually. But, the more I go back and check in with them, the more it's starting to become part of their routine. And so that's kind of what I want to get to with our class, as far as um, how you build your routine of balance, right? Of taking care of your mind, body, and soul. So one of the ideas behind this, right, is that we already do these, we already practice these smaller rituals, but what are they, right? Because there's some obvious ones. My question to you all openly is, what do you all do to practice, right? Taking care of your mind, body, and soul. What's something that's already a part of your package?
Can I start out?
Sure, Daniel, go ahead.
So to practice that, usually, recently I've been like thinking self-worth is very important to like keep a very healthy mental mindset. So like noticing that you are like very important and how like you shouldn't let others bring you down because like you have to sorry, I'm trying to like think it in words.
Well, you know, you have a worth, right? As somebody just mentioned it, right? And your worth is not determined by other people, but rather other people can help you find your worth, right? And so last week I mentioned how sometimes we've created an identity that we carry forward, that we've internalized, but other people have seen the developed version of that identity, right? So I might still feel myself as transfer student Mario, but there's other people in the community that see me as Dr. Galicia, right? They don't understand those trials and tribulations, but they do see a more developed version of that. And so I think that there's that component to explore, to explore as well. But um, you're right. You know, self worth is always key to our personal success. One way to kind of reaffirm that, right, is by what I mentioned in that chapter, is creating this list of phrases for yourself that you can read and remind yourself, and give yourself these affirmations, these facts, these truths, in a moment of doubt, right? When you're stuck and you're stressing out with finals, personal stuff. And that's the other side of this. Sometimes we feel like we can compartmentalize and separate personal from school. The reality is that it's very difficult to, if not impossible, you know, with so many different obstacles moving around you. But you know what? At this point, I actually wanted to ask one of our TAs if she wouldn't mind sharing from her perspective um, what we were discussing actually last session. So, Jessica, if you don't mind talking to our students from your own professional background as far as mind, body, and soul conversation goes. Hey.
Hi. All right. Can everyone hear me and see me?
Yeah.
Awesome. Great. So, so I have an educational psychology and clinical psychology background, and that's kind of what I'm going to grad school for. And that's a really good topic that you kind of brought up, Daniel, about kind of self-worth. And I think it's an important topic to kind of discuss and differentiate self-worth from self-esteem, right? That's something that is inherently kind of sometimes used interchangeably, and sometimes kind of breaking that apart is something that can be helpful to kind of recognize for yourself and where you lie on both of those spectrums, right? So self-esteem is kind of what we think and really feel about ourselves, and self-worth is recognizing that you're greater than all of those things, right? You're greater than all those achievements or goals that you think. It's really like a deeper knowing that you are, of value, that you are lovable, you are necessary, and have worth regardless of your achievements, right? So these are all things that are are great to kind of break down and be introspective on this journey of your goals in achieving higher education, because we all are going to higher education, you guys being undergraduates and us being graduate students and even professors, right, who are done with all of that. We're all trying to achieve higher goals, but also you want to make sure that you're not neglecting your own needs, right? Your own journey, your own thought processes, and being introspective about any mental health things that you might want to check up on, right? And just in the last class, we had a discussion about kind of mental health and what resources are available at UCSB. And I always tell my students, whether they're my undergraduates or my research assistants or anyone I'm mentoring, is to really go and see a therapist that's available on campus. I think right now it's virtual therapy, right? We have a great system where you can get virtual therapy, and there's a lot of clinicians there that will help you with that. And even if you're not struggling with anything, even if you are, you know, seemingly doing well, there's different things you can go to therapy for, to maybe explore different perspectives and have that third party, someone who doesn't know you, who doesn't have certain biases, good or bad, towards you, and just to kind of talk through your thoughts and anything like that, right? And just have something like a mirror to bounce off of. And a lot of times, you know, something that I study in my research is that there are different histories, whether it's gender or cultural histories or experiences that might be barriers or stigmas to seeking therapy and things like that. And I think that that's something that you're having the luxury to do in finding yourself throughout college, right? In your undergraduate experience. Yes, you're studying, trying to get good grades, trying to graduate, but you're also kind of figuring out who you are, and that we have these resources available for you to do that. And they're free, so you should definitely take advantage of it, because when you graduate, it's going to be a lot more expensive, you know, than it is to do it during college. So taking advantage of that is going to be really, really helpful. Yeah. Is there anything else you wanted me to touch upon, Mario?
No, you brought up a really great topic of conversation, right? For context, because you know, as our conversation enrolled in the first session, I was so focused on trying to keep up with the students that had their hands raised that I forgot about an expert we had in the room, you. And so, you know, when we're talking about mental health, when we're talking about, you know, finding this balance, right, the semblance of balance too, it's important to keep things into perspective and have the proper context. And so I think you've brought up a great segue for like context, right? Like what are we all personally doing that we can talk about, you know, therapy, right? Like therapy for me initially started as a personal process to help me move away from some of the weight I was carrying from street life, right? Not to say that 20 years later that weight's off, right? But I've learned how to deal with those situations when they pop up better, right? And in time, my situations in life have developed, right? You go from an undergrad dealing with those personal situations to moving in and living with a partner to then being married and going to graduate school at the same time. And these present a lot of situations that um, you might not necessarily be qualified, right, to take care of on your own. And that's why you have a plethora of student services departments and resources that we're trying to connect you with so that you can find, you know, your starting point or maybe your next step, so that then you can start adding them to your list, to your own equation, to build your routine. And so, you know, today I still go to therapy for my personal reasons, right? Like my stuff. And then there's also those times that my wife and I go together to discuss our communication that we need to work on, or some of the situations that come out of a marriage, out of a 15, 20-year relationship. Things develop, and so that's why I think it was great for you to bring up the context, right, of self-worth, value, and the development of these resources as we move along as well, right? You start somewhere and then it turns into slightly something different, possibly, which is okay, because it's a journey. Like you mentioned, I'm no longer a student, but I still have my human needs, right? I still have, as a human, to take care of and maintain certain parts of myself. And at certain times or others, it varies which areas I need a little more maintenance on. So this is what the discussion is kind of about. What are some of the tools in your toolbox that allow you to provide some maintenance when you need it, right? So let me open it up to some of you, or to the rest of you. What do you do? What do you practice, right? As part of your healthy mind, body, and soul routine.
And just very quickly, before you start calling on these wonderful students who want to participate and sharing their experiences, something I always like to say is, even people who are in these helping practices, psychologists, therapists, they also go to therapy, right? They go see someone else and they talk about, their issues, their encounters, or things that they want to work on, right, and improve on. So it's something that they're experiencing as well.
Right. And it's something that we don't think about, because we put the title and we think they're straight. This is their job. Like, why
Yeah.
would? But the reality is, like, just like I mentioned, you bring on other people's stresses. The job can do that too. You're human. As a therapist, I imagine you make organic connections, right, with patients and people. Cool. Thank you, Jessica. Feel free to jump in. You, Matt, Bertin, as you all see like something that's of your expertise as well, right? Or something you see relevant. So you have the hands up feature for Zoom. If you want to share, you can go ahead and do that, and it's easy for me to kind of keep track of who wants to participate. Who wants to share what they do, what they currently practice? Alyssa, I saw you go up first. How about you?
Yeah, so just something kind of basic that I've been more aware of is like paying more attention to like what I say about myself, or like how I think about myself, because oftentimes it's easy to be like self-deprecating or say something on the fly like, oh my gosh, I'm so stupid, or like, oh, I'm so lazy. And we might think that's kind of just like a joke, or it doesn't really affect us really, and it's just in the moment, that's kind of how we feel about ourselves. But I've taken it upon myself to kind of be more aware of it, because I feel like subconsciously your negative like words about yourself can really like hinder your self-esteem and your sense of self-worth. So just whenever like I'm taking on a task, or like right before a test, like even if I could have like not studied like the whole, like I couldn't have like even opened my book, but right before the test I'll say like, I'm ready for this, like I'm smart, like I can do this. Just like saying a few words about myself, and I feel like that kind of internalizes some self-esteem for myself.
I feel like I've done the same myself in the past, where I feel, even if I have prepared enough, I feel underprepared or just stressed out about the process, the test, the interview. But right, having those moments where you reaffirm to yourself, right? You tell yourself the facts, right? You studied, you know the material, you're ready to knock it out. All those things, is cool, because it self motivates, right? And when you can self motivate, that's an important quality to not just have, but to recognize when you're doing it, right? It also helps you in group, right? When you get together and you study, this is also something that could very literally transfer along within your group and help more than just you be more successful. Jessica, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, popping in again. Yeah, so I actually did some research on this, and you can find it in general, but in general, like positive behavior support psychology, it's called positive reframing, right? So it's not to say you're not, you're disregarding any other kind of worries or thoughts or minimalizing that you might not do well, but it's also just kind of reframing your brain to really be more positive in that scenario, right? So if you studied, but you didn't think you studied enough and you're sitting there, you're gonna have to start the test, kind of instead of beating yourself up about it, like you said, Alyssa, kind of reframing your brain to say, hey, I did study, and I'm calm right now, I'm gonna take this test and reframe your brain. And it's kind of the chemistry behind that is you're actually tricking your brain, right? When you're doing positive reframing and you're working on it, it's like a muscle in your brain, and it's connecting different kind of neurological connections within it, and you're building that muscle to help you for the next time, right? So that's like a cool trick that helps a lot, that positive reframing. You're building a muscle so that for the next time, your next worry, your next anxiety, you can kind of step out of that and step out of yourself and kind of third-eyed person talk to yourself in that way.
That's great insight because on the pedagogical side, using that same positive reframing, but from a slightly different perspective, right? From a quote unquote teacher to student, right? Rather than the harsh criticisms of like not good, not enough, providing some fear. Hey, you did some good work here. You did this, this, and this right. This would have been helpful to add to it, right? That's also something that is interestingly been something that's developed and transferred from like being an undergrad and using it for myself to now as a professional realizing, hey, it helps you, it works for you. This is something that's probably more helpful to your students than um, being condescending to them, even in an academic way, right? That the quote unquote old school fashion of a professor, if you will, right? See, this is what I love having the variety of TAs that we have because on any given topic, we can have an expert, so to speak, in the room that can jump in and provide this additional side to context and in our class. Thank you, Jessica. Billy Jack, I saw you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to touch on what Jessica was bringing up about the positive reframing. Seems like a good strategy for getting rid of imposter syndrome, which is a big, I'm always worried about. Am I smart enough to go here, or am I too old to be here, and things like that. So that seems like a good strategy to partake to kind of help curb that imposter syndrome.
What's your take on that, Jessica? I think he was speaking to you.
Yeah, I mean, just in general, kinder self-talk, right? To yourself. You've worked hard, you're here, things might get difficult, but just kinder self-talk in general is gonna be better than kind of beating yourself up, because beating yourself up, you're kind of living in the past, right? You're kind of ruminating on those thoughts. But kinder self-talk, you're actually preparing your current self, your present self, for the future, right? For possibilities of better. And to shine a light on imposter syndrome, that really never stops. Me as a graduate student, I still have imposter syndrome. Some professors, they still have imposter syndromes. Some people at the very top, they still have it, but kind of just learning how to navigate through that and mitigate it and recognizing your accomplishments, right? You worked hard, you're here, you deserve to be here, right? So kind of combating that with that self, that kinder self-talk to yourself.
Awesome. I love these conversations. Um, let me see. I saw Val. Your hand is up. You like to share?
Yes. So um so I like to take care of like myself. I like to, if I'm overwhelmed or if I'm having like anxiety, because I do have anxiety issues. I like to take a break from what I'm doing, and I'll play my ukulele. I'll write. I have like journals and journals of like poetry and stories I've written when I'm having like anxiety or like when I'm just feeling overwhelmed, because that helps me a lot. Other times I'll go ride my bike with my dad, and it really does like help to refocus what I'm trying to think of or like what's going on. Like especially just taking a break and like even just moving from one spot to another really just helps me out. I think that's something that really does help. So.
I've as a process of an academic, right? You write and you write and you write. And when I first got to UCSB as a transfer undergrad, it felt overwhelming as a thought that I was going to have to write, 15-page papers per class when in half the amount of time that I had at the community college. But one of the things that I started realizing once I got into the stream of things was that it was still therapeutic, even though it was academic. Because for me, I was making a connection between my personal and the academic material that I was going through. The academic material was kind of providing me insight and information I didn't have on some of the struggles that I'd been through. And so I was drawing those connections, and um, as I was writing, right, in response, the prompts, the final papers, it was I always felt like a weight had been lifted off my back when I turned in the paper, not just because the assignment was done, but because of the process I'd been through in writing what I wrote as my response to the assignment. And I started realizing that when I was a kid, I used to journal quite a bit too. And it's something that um, through time I've shared with some people at different parts, and it ultimately ended up motivating me to start writing this book that I'm sharing with you. It started off kind of as journal entries and notes and random thoughts that I was putting down on paper, and now I'm trying to be more organized about the approach. So the great thing about writing is all of that, right? You have all of those options. It's therapeutic. It can be personal in a different way, like professionally, long term, or you just have it and it's something you can check in on. Be like, man, I remember that. It also kind of helps you um, redefine where you are as a person, right? Just going back and reading some of those journals from the past, you're like, wow, I've done a lot. I've made it here, and back. This is the moment when I felt that I was at my lowest, that I'd never be able to accomplish X, Y, or Z, and yet here I am right now. And so it's a very powerful tool for that manner as well. Thank you for sharing that, Val. Does anybody else wanna jump in and share before I start calling on people? Amelia, I see that you have your hand up.
Yeah. Going off on journaling, I also find it like really nice to just like write down what you're like grateful for. So like when you're upset, like you start to realize like, oh, I have like all these things, all these people who support me. So you're not just focusing on the bad, because that's what like you always tend to do when you're upset. You only think about all the bad things in your life. So when you write down what you're grateful for, it's just like a nice reassurance that like there are good things in your life too.
Definitely. And that, we tend to highlight, sometimes by instinct, the negative stuff more so than the positive stuff. And sometimes the negative situations don't occur as often, but somehow it just kind of takes over the thought process. And it's a great strategy to have, right? As a positive again, reinforcement tool. I saw Jocelyn and Kaylee, so we'll go Jocelyn first.
Oh, okay. So I just wanted to share, like, just based on like how everybody, their coping mechanisms and stuff. One thing that I do, or that I kind of allow myself to do now, is that when something gets really overwhelming, because I have this tendency of overworking myself and like doing a lot of stuff, and I think that when I was younger, I never really gave me the chance to kind of take all of that in, like the fact that I'm like always busy, I'm always like doing something. And so when I would feel overwhelmed, like one thing that I was really lucky was that I went to a community college with one of my best friends, and one thing she would do is she would like sit down and she would let me just vent. She would let me vent, and she would let me cry, and she would let me like just I don't know how to say it in English, but desahogarme. It was just something that I just needed just to vent about things.
Yeah.
So one thing that when I started going to therapy, because I started realizing that I was going through like anxiety and panic attacks, I felt really guilty going to therapy. And like I felt guilty because I felt like there's people out there that have like real trauma, real issues, and I felt like what I was complaining about was that I was just overworked, and I felt like it wasn't like a valid reason to go like see a therapist. But when I got there, like she kind of explained to me that there's a lot, that's how a lot of people feel when they go. And she let me know, because I was going to therapy, but my family wasn't like, they weren't aware, because I just didn't want people to know that I was going to therapy, especially my family. I didn't want them to see me like somebody that can't handle stress or something. So when I started going, like she started giving me the affirmations of like, it's okay, like, you know, you're strong, you're brave, even if like you feel like you're not right now. So one thing that I started doing was also like talking, venting, but also realizing that you can't just go to therapy and feel like, oh, that's the only thing that's going to help me. So one thing she recommended me to do was to exercise. So right before class, I would always work out like at least an hour, and then I will head to class. And then sometime that week, like I'll have a like a therapy session, just so that I was taking care of not just my mind, but also like my physical like being, because I was having like panic attacks even if I was going to therapy. So I just felt like at one point venting, and you might try to do different like things to like get over it, but sometimes it's still gonna happen. So I just wanted to like, you know, share that.
No, thank you for sharing. It brings up great strategies and points, right, for people to consider. Um, the stigma behind therapy is very real, and I mentioned it. I don't know if I did in this class, but in the prior class I did. And um, you know, when I started sharing with my family, especially my parents, that I was going to therapy, they had a negative reaction to it. And um, it was one that maybe several years before would have kept me from going to therapy, but I had already surrounded myself around people that were constantly kind of reaffirming the fact that I needed to engage, and I needed to do it as part of my routine, um, because I didn't have all of the tools that I needed in my toolbox to deal with these situations outside of what my parents had prepared me for. Right, what they were given, what they've been shown, what they've experienced, can sometimes only be really effective in their generation. If you notice how fast like technology has moved from the last 20, 30 years, it's generations and generations worth in a really short amount of time, right? Like 30 years before that, computers were fitting in these large rooms, and now you have one in your pocket. You have one that you call somebody, right? That you can Google while you're in class and texting somebody, right? Like that kind of computer performance fit in like a couple of rooms before. So the development, right? My dad growing up in that generation, like his framework with computers and technology is different than like my children right now. So how they interact, how they converse, sometimes they need a buffer, someone to translate. But the cool thing is that you can always kind of point back to those cultural relevance points and use that as a semblance to connect, right? And so when I started doing that, my parents started seeing how it was relational to our family, right? How therapy wasn't just like what they had thought was false, what they thought wasn't helpful, but rather after a while, because of my own persistence and creating a routine, even passing some along that to my children, now my parents see that it's not just talk, right? They see the difference in my children's attitudes, um, versus some of their cousins, and you start to unpack some of the differences, right? And they tend to notice how we take care of the therapeutic side of things. We focus on that versus our other family members who don't, because culturally they don't believe in it, right? For me, this is where I can help redefine what was once considered culture for me, right? So this is what it was, but this is what I'm finding out it could also be, and opening myself up to it helps me reframe and redefine culture, right? And so those are how I was able to make some of those connections. And you're very right. Therapy has its own appeals to certain groups, but we still have communities that, by and large, um, don't buy into it. For many different reasons. But it's something you have available as a UCSB student, right? And it's something to take advantage of, definitely. Rena, I saw your hand go up. I'm gonna go with Kaylee first in order, and then you can go after her. Okay?
So I just wanted to share something really cool with you guys. For those of you who were talking about journaling, during like beginning quarantine, I started like my mental health just started declining a lot. And so I looked into, things that would help me. And I found something called therapy notebooks. And the therapy notebooks are just, they help you manage stress and anxiety, and they empower you with tools and exercises. So these are created by therapists, and the journals are supported by research. So throughout the journals, there's so you can write down, what you're feeling, and it also gives you tools and tips for you to be able to cope with stress and anxiety. So they're just really cool if it's something that you guys want to look into.
That sounds like a great resource. Definitely have to look into it myself. Um, One of the things that one of my daughter's teachers told me about a couple years ago was that my daughter has an artistic inclination, right? She loves drawing. She she goes straight towards that, right? And so she told me that there were these coloring books that were intended to be kind of like stress relieving, right? They require you to focus so much on the pattern and allow your creativity to kind of flow in how you design it, that you kind of forget about those other things you were stressing out on before you got. And so art, that's how I transferred it to her. But then it was so interesting because once I had that conversation with her teacher, I started realizing how many adults in my life around me also practiced art as a way to kind of release and vent, right? Whether it was painting or poetry, right, is another art. There's different forms, musical art, and these are all ways to kind of allow you to go through that process, right, of getting through those emotions in a more positive manner than holding them in and then creating them into some unnecessary weight down the road. Thank you for sharing that. Appreciate the resource. Um, could you do me a favor, Kaylee? Do you have like the specific name of the resource that you mentioned that you could share with us on chat, so that maybe then I can look it up, and if I find it, make it available to the website?
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and put down the link, and then also the name of the books that they have.
Awesome. Thank you. Rena, you wanted to share.
Uh, in order to control my anxiety, if I just try to do gardening, and because it's kind of physical work, that it helps me to give this some time to think about the problems that I am confronting. So uh, that's the thing that I do. I'm not talking usually because that is not helping me that actually, but I do gardening and working out, not physical activities, but walking around and doing stuff around home. So that with doing and completing that task and see how plants get water or the sunshine, how it comes down, it it gives me energy. That's it. That is my way.
That's a great way. You're connecting to Earth, you know, to Mother Nature, and that's always one of the. In the last class, we also talked about students um, and ocean type of activities or beach activities, right? And how that helped them connect to Mother Nature, and in a way that's as you mentioned, a way to refocus and recenter away from these other stresses. But gardening is great. Last class we mentioned that out here at UC Santa Barbara, in the family housing centers, the they have gardens that are available for the student residents for family student housing. So if you live at one of the two family designation, you have garden space available where right now, especially because of the pandemic, you're starting to see so many different garden plots popping up in these different housing complexes, and all the different varietals that people are growing year round now, because it's been 5 months, 6 months since people started their plots, and now we're this far into the pandemic. So I've had friends that are starting to plan their fall and winter garden now, because that's what's next for them. This pandemic kind of going that way, and they find it just as relieving as you. One of the TAs from the last class is one of those people that has a garden um, that we know of. So I take the kids over there every once in a while, and I'm like, teaching them different things, but also, like you mentioned, Rena, it's a good way for them to get out and put their hands to work, and that kind of helps. I think psychologically also, if you're struggling with like a paper, something that's like may seem a little more abstract, and dang, 10 pages, right? And you're only 3 pages in. If you go outside and you garden, in a half an hour, you see some immediate results. And that in itself is a good stoke of like motivation, because man, I did that in 30 minutes. I'm gonna go in there and knock out some more of this paper. And then you just keep switching on and off. And before you know it, after a few days, you've got your 10 pages done. And so that was something that I learned from some of my undergrad friends when I transferred in also. They taught me how gardening helped them kind of distract. I clean around the house too. My wife knows when I'm stressed out, when it's building up, because I start cleaning the showers. I start, scrubbing places that I'm not usually scrubbing, and detailing the counter. So she's like, "You need to go for a walk. You need to do this, and there's a list. We have options, which is why this conversation is great, because some of us don't know how many options we have available until some of our peers or classmates start sharing, right?
Yeah. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Rena.
Thank you.
Daniel, I see your hand up.
So I believe understanding that there will be failures in life, and then taking those failures to like turn them into like a positive outcome is really important. So just getting like prepared that not everything will be okay. Like just having that like thought in the back that something can go wrong, so you're prepared if something does go wrong. So I feel like very early in like schooling, they always teach us, oh, everything's gonna be all right. You're so perfect and everything. Like, and then when this something bad happens, they don't know how to react, and it's like you're just stuck there and there's like nothing much to do.
That's a great point. Jessica, I'm gonna ask you if you've got anything you'd like to add, because I think I remember you mentioning something about this last class as well.
Hello.
Mhm.
What did you have in mind? If you could just prime me.
So what Daniel was mentioning to us, right, was and correct me if I'm wrong, but just kind of understanding failure, right, in relevance to this transition. So to put it into like transfer context, right, you might have been a straight A transfer student in a semester system. You transfer to UCSB and you get B's and C's, or you don't get straight A's, right, and that has kind of this refocus, or you might even fail a class flat out, right? So how do you deal with failure relative to the transition is what I think Daniel was
Yeah.
talking about.
Yeah, I think he put it in really good ways that acknowledging that failure is a part of this process, and that getting this feedback, whether it's failing a class or not getting the specific marks that you wanted for your grades, that's part of like this constructive criticism that you're going to learn, and to build a harder shell for that, because you are going to fail in order to succeed. And I can speak on that personally, because I've always been one to kind of freak out when anyone gives me any recommendation or suggestion. If I'm writing a paper, they're like, oh, well, you could change this and this, and I will just kind of melt down and like, oh no, they think I'm dumb. It's part of that imposter syndrome that we talked about, right? They didn't think I belong here. It's kind of like this, you kind of bring it to a larger macro sense when you can really refocus and look at what's at hand, right? Microly, they're just trying to help you succeed, or whatever you're experiencing, regardless of the failure. It's just another kind of step or momentum to move forward, right? You kind of learn from what they're criticizing, learn from that experience, and it's going to happen. And that's okay. It's part of the learning process. And I've gotten plenty of manuscripts returned back, and saying that you need to change this and this. And before, I would kind of melt to the ground and just be like, oh no, I'm not meant to be a researcher. They rejected my paper, it's not going to get published. But now it's more of a understanding that I'm turning in my best work, and even if it's being rejected or being criticized or whatever, I'm going to take that as a learning opportunity and better myself in that way. Because a lot of the times, it's not meant to be malicious. It's your own head telling you that if you don't do this, if you don't achieve this certain aspect, that it's all over. But most of the time, people who are giving you feedback, or those experiences where you are encountering failure, those people are kind of trying to help you, trying to better yourself. So the corrections I get on my papers that aren't going to be published, they're not saying you're never going to be published. They're just saying, here are some things that you need to do to make it even better. So just kind of recognizing that, and really acknowledging that it is a part of this process, and acknowledging things that can go wrong, so you're not shocked that when things actually can go wrong and happen. It would be very, very helpful to kind of end this whole process.
Right. And I'm on the extreme side of understanding failure, like as a transfer student, being kicked out of 3 community colleges, kind of cemented that thought, in the back of my head. It didn't matter what I accomplished. I always felt I was on the verge of making the same mistakes. And it took me a while, right? It took me a manner of trying these different resources, whether it's physical or mental health, or meditating, or whatever it was, talking to friends, hearing their personal experiences, how they deal with things, right? That was all super helpful to understanding that failure, like you said, is something to learn from, right? Not to distance yourself away. Because if you just ignore it, right, and you keep moving forward, it's bound to happen again, probably in a different way, but then it's gonna feel more overwhelming. And like now you've reaffirmed the fact that you are gonna fail because that's failing, and now you have history of doing it 2 3 times or whatever. But what have you done right in the process? What can you learn from what you didn't do right? Right. And so, me not going to class, me not visiting professors, me not going and taking advantage of all the resources I was paying for, tutoring, financial aid, EOPNS center, all of that. They're churning out events, they're churning out workshops, and I just flat out felt I was above it, that I was fine, I could take care of it, but I had to realize it. Took a couple people. It took a little while to start figuring this out, but you can do a lot with failure if you have the proper perspective, right? Like you mentioned, professionally, it just transfers forward. Like, you know, I actually had a student once who told me that they didn't mind getting their paper rejected for a conference as an undergrad because in high school as a teenager they had been rejected so often by girls. They're like, rejection is kind of natural, and he laughed. He's like, I've been rejected by girls to the prom, to this, to that. Like, this is just a paper. I'm not even seeing their face. Like, he had this whole way of thinking about it that helped me because I was taking it a little more serious when people would reject my work, right? Because I know that it's badass. I know that I'm working on some cutting edge stuff. Like, why are you hating on it? Just give me the chance. And having those students come in and just provide that helps us out too, and I think that that's a point I want to make, that even though I'm not, quote unquote formal student enrolled, I'm still a student of life. I'm still a student learning in this discussion and process with you. I'll walk away from today's conversation and reflect on and start to see, hey, what can I tinker with? What should I do, different? What can I add to my own routine that maybe I haven't done in a while or at all? And this is what I'm hoping that this space for us as a class can create for you, because right now we're doing distance learning, and sometimes it's a little bit harder to self-motivate if we're not physically close to like our roommates or our peers, and we're not seeing them, physically in class and like having those minor interactions. But we really want to find a way to show that you're not alone in feeling some of the things that you feel, right? Or believing what you believe, but rather, this community of people that are here for you to support you can help you move along in a more beneficial way for your overall health, right? If I were to talk to you one-on-one at the end of the day, and this is something I've told my nephew. My nephew has a baseball scholarship to play at a university, and I tell him, if at the end of the day you have too many stresses and you're not passing your classes, you're not playing on the field. So for me, I don't want you to feel like I need you to be a baseball player because you have a baseball scholarship and that's the next step. I want you to be a college graduate. That's my goal for you. If you can walk away with a college degree, right, paid for because you had this other skill, there are things we can combine from those experiences and move forward, right? You might not be an athlete, but let's be honest, only 1% of all student athletes make it to their professional rank. So, that perspective helps us understand what we might deem as failure, right? He would think failing is not being drafted by the Major League Baseball teams. For me, that's not failure. For me, him getting a college scholarship is above and beyond anything I was able to accomplish, and I was a high school athlete. So I have those conversations where I try to let him understand that even as though he feels he hasn't hit his bars, his goals, there's still things that he's flying way past in relative context to him, his family members, right? He's like, but you're a doctor, you have a PhD. I'm like, yeah, but in 3 years you could be, a major league ball player or a consultant training the next generation of athletes. there's a place for you in this world where you can contribute and help create positive change too, right? This situation you're going through now, other athletes will be going through at a time that you'll be able to help them out, you know? And so I think that there's also value in understanding that um, even though we feel, you know, as critical as we can be about ourselves, the reality is often that we are our own worst critic, and sometimes taking other people's advice is softer for us, right? And so that's why I suggest surrounding yourself with people you can rely on. Somebody last class said a rock, that one person, and I suggested to them having 2 or 3, maybe more, right? And depending on the moment, depending on the circumstance, you can reach out to different people to kind of help you navigate through those moments, navigate through those times. So hopefully through the course of the class, the assignments, and in the future, the breakout rooms, we'll be able to help you all begin to create some of your community connections, beginning with this class. So hopefully, by the time you're able to experience college in person, UCSB, you know, live and in ground, you'll have some folks that you can connect with and be like, dang, it feels so different now that we're in person and I'm not seeing you through Zoom or texting with you, right? And like that in itself could be an accomplishment for you to not feel so stressed out as you transition in to this new university environment, right? So I'm looking at time, and during this great conversation, we've actually reached the end of our allotted class time, right? It's 4:45 now. And so out of respect for the time, I'm gonna close out any additional comments or instances of reflection you all want to share, but rather we can just hold those on for the next session that we have. As I mentioned, this chapter 2 discusses short and long-term planning. And so you'll start to notice as you begin to read through the chapter and see what I'm talking about, how they can run in parallel, right? This taking care of yourself, mind, body, soul is actually part of these short-term and long-term plans also. So the chapters, I hope, go hand in hand with each other as you read them. Any questions before we check out for the afternoon? No? All righty. So if anything pops up, please go ahead and email us. Let us know so we can try to help you. Other than that, I'll see you all Thursday. Have a good one. Bye.
Thank you, Professor. Bye.